It's time for story time.
The Fox and the Crow. Most crows would accept that they are not the most striking birds. However, there was one crow who always sulked when the other woodland birds chatted about who was the most colorful or who had the finest voice. So she was not happy when a baby bird suddenly chirped. Who has the most beautiful feathers? Before anyone could say a word, the crow answered, The crow, of course. Now, the other birds laughed so much, the branches all swayed. Nonsense! Everyone knows the night fisher has the most beautiful orange and blue feathers, said the sparrow. A crow is just the same dull color from head to toe. Even the blackbird has orange feet. Well, who can sing the best then? Asked the baby bird. And without hesitation, the crow replied confidently, The crow, of course. This time some of the birds were knocked out of the tree, which shook from the laughter of all the birds. No, no, chuckled the woodpecker. It's the nightingale who has the sweetest song. A crow's voice is too croaky and makes me think of winter. The crow was so upset, she wanted to fly off to be on her own. She hung her head in shame, but then suddenly spied a large piece of cheese lying in the grass below. I do have a good voice, she told herself, and I'm clever. None of the others have spotted that cheese. And she swooped down, grabbing the cheese with her sharp beak. Then she flew back to the tree, flapping her wings proudly, showing off her prize to the envy of all the other birds. What a lovely piece of cheese, cried the sparrow. Can we share it? But the crow shook her head. After all, why should she share when everyone else had been so mean to her? So the other birds all flew away in disgust. Good, thought the crow. Now I can enjoy my cheese in peace. She flew up to a higher branch and settled herself. But just at that moment, a beautiful red fox sauntered by. Spotting the crow, his eyes narrowed as he saw the cheese wedged in her beak. Mmm, thought the fox. That looks a tasty piece of cheese, indeed. I must have it. Now, the fox knew he needed a clever plan. So he slowly circled the tree twice before deciding what to do. Seeing the fox, a family of rabbits quickly ran from the woods and into the meadow to hide. They knew exactly how dangerous he could be. Good morning, said the fox in his friendliest voice, calling up to the crow. What a very fine bird you are. Looking at your glossy feathers, how they shine. You must be the finest bird I've ever seen. And noticing the crow raising her head up high, he added, None of the other birds in the woods is a match for you. This is just what the crow needed to hear. No one had ever told her she had beautiful feathers. In fact, no one had ever admired anything about her before. I'm beautiful too, she said to herself as she brimmed with pride. The fox had hoped the crow would open her mouth to say thank you. So far, his plan was not working. He needed to think quickly I imagine a bird with fine, slick feathers like you would also have a beautiful voice, he continued, using all his cunning. The delighted crow nodded. At last, she thought, here is someone who appreciates me. All those other birds who think I have a croaky voice are plain wrong. I wish they could hear what this fox is telling me. The fox was losing patience, but tried once more. Would you be so kind as to share your beautiful voice with me? He said meekly. I'm sure it's even sweeter than the song of the nightingale. At this time, the crow couldn't resist the fox's flattery. I do have a beautiful voice, she told herself, and I'm going to prove it. She added defiantly. She puffed up her chest and opened her sharp beak. Caw, 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 she croaked. Down, down, down fell the cheese, right into the fox's wide open mouth. Snap went his jaws. The fox chewed the cheese very slowly, determined to enjoy every bite. This was surely the best cheese he had ever tasted. So good, he called up to the stunned crow. And as he sleeked away, he added, you really are a very vain bird. A very vain bird who can't sing either. As the crow sat on the branch all alone, she realized she had learned a very important lesson today, and she knew she would never be fooled by flattery ever again. The end. Welcome, everyone. It's time for story time. Today we're going to be reading from 5-Minute Stories, and today's fairy tale will be Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Once upon a time, there was a little girl named Goldilocks who had beautiful golden hair. She lived in a pretty house right at the edge of the forest. Each morning, she liked to play outside before breakfast, gathering flowers and looking at the animals who lived in the trees. One day, she strayed farther than usual. She skipped happily along the forest path, chasing butterflies until she was far from home and very hungry. Just as she was thinking it would take a long time to walk back for breakfast, a delicious smell wafted through the woods. She followed it all the way to a little cottage. I wonder who lives here, Goldilocks said to herself. Perhaps they would share their breakfast with me. She knocked on the door, but there was no answer. As Goldilocks pushed gently on the door, it swung open. The house inside was cozy and inviting. Even though she knew she shouldn't, Goldilocks stepped inside. The delicious smell was coming from 3 bowls of steaming porridge on the table. There was a great big bowl, a middle-sized bowl, and a teeny tiny bowl. Goldilocks was so hungry that even though she knew she shouldn't, she tasted the porridge in the biggest bowl. Ew, she cried. The porridge is too hot. Next, she tasted the porridge in the middle-sized bowl. Yuck, she said. This porridge is far too cold. So finally, she tried the porridge in the teeny tiny bowl. Yum, Goldilocks said. This porridge is just right. And she ate it all up. With her tummy nice and full, Goldilocks decided to rest before she set out for home. She looked around the room for somewhere to sit. There were 3 chairs, a great big chair, a middle-sized chair, and a teeny tiny chair. She climbed onto the great big chair. The chair was far too high, she said. Next, she tried the middle-sized chair, but she sank deep into the cushions. No, she said, this chair is far too squashy. So she sat on the teeny tiny chair. This chair is just right, she said, and settled down. But Goldilocks was very full of porridge and too heavy for the teeny tiny chair. It squeaked and creaked and creaked and cracked and then crash. It broke into teeny tiny pieces, and Goldilocks fell to the floor. Well, that wasn't a very good chair, she said grumpily. Then, even though she knew she shouldn't, she went to look upstairs. In the bedroom were 3 beds, a great big bed, a middle-sized bed, and a teeny tiny bed. She tried to lie down in the great big bed, but it wasn't all comfy. This bed is too hard and lumpy, she grumbled. Then Goldilocks laid on the middle-sized bed, but that was no better. This bed is too soft and squishy, she mumbled. And so at last she snuggled down in the teeny tiny bed. This bed is just right. And with that, she fell asleep. Now, whenever there's a house with porridge and chairs and beds, there is usually someone who lives there. And this was true for this house. 3 big brown bears lived there. A great big daddy bear, a middle-sized mommy bear, and a teeny tiny baby bear. The 3 bears had made their porridge and gone out for a walk in the woods while it was cooling down. At last, they went home for their breakfast. "Why is the door open?" Daddy Bear said in his deep, gruff voice. "Why are there footprints on the floor?" Mummy Bear said in her soft, low voice. Baby Bear said nothing. They went over to the table, and Daddy Bear looked in his bowl. Someone's been eating my porridge," he growled. Mummy Bear looked in her bowl. "Someone's been eating my porridge," she exclaimed. Baby Bear looked in his bowl. "Someone's been eating my porridge, and they've eaten it all up," he cried in his teeny tiny voice. Daddy Bear stumped over to his chair. "Someone's been sitting in my chair," he growled. "There's a long hair on it." "Someone's been sitting in my chair," Mama Bear exclaimed. "The cushions are all squashed." Baby Bear looked at his chair. "Someone's been sitting in my chair," he cried, "and they're broken into pieces." "Let's get to the bottom of this," Daddy Bear growled. And they padded upstairs to the bedroom. Now, Daddy Bear saw the rumpled covers of his bed. "Someone's been sleeping in my bed," he grumbled. Mummy Bear saw the jumbled pillows on her bed. "Someone's been sleeping in my bed," she said. Baby Bear paddled up to his bed. "Someone's been sleeping in my bed, and they're still there," he cried. The 3 bears crowded around the sleeping girl. Baby Bear reached out his fuzzy paw to touch her golden curls. Goldilocks opened her eyes. Imagine her surprise when she saw 3 bears peering down at her. She leapt out of the bed, ran down the stairs, through the door, along the path, and all the way home. And she never visited the house of the 3 bears ever again. The end. Today's story is Cinderella. Let the story time begin. Once upon a time, there was a young girl who lived with her widowed father. Eventually, her father remarried. His new wife had 2 daughters of her own. She was mean and spiteful to the young girl, and so were her daughters. They made the girl do all the housework, eat scraps, and sleep by the fireplace among the ashes and cinders. Because she slept in the cinders, they named her Cinderella. One day, a letter arrived from the palace. All the women in the land were invited to a grand ball where the prince would choose a bride. Cinderella's stepsisters were very excited. Her stepmother was sure one of her daughters would marry the prince. She made Cinderella work night and day to make them as beautiful as possible. Cinderella washed and curled their dull hair. She cut and shaped their ragged nails. She stitched their ball gowns, and she polished their dancing shoes until they shone. Cinderella longed to go to the ball herself, but her stepsisters just laughed. "Ha! You go to the ball?" The elder stepsister said. "You don't even have a pretty dress." "How ridiculous," laughed the younger stepsister. "You're always covered in soot and cinders." Well, tears ran down Cinderella's face as she helped her stepsisters into their dresses and jewels. At last, they left for the ball. Cinderella sat alone by the fireplace. She cried and cried. "If only I could go to the ball," she said through her tears, "and be happy for just one night. I so wish I could go." Cinderella had barely finished speaking when there was a sparkle of light in the dull kitchen, and there stood a fairy. "Don't be afraid, my dear. I'm your fairy godmother," the fairy said, "and you shall go to that ball." Cinderella stared in amazement at the fairy. Quickly, she dried her eyes. "Really? Can I really go to the ball?" she asked, barely daring to believe it. If I do, I say it, all will be well," the fairy answered. "I'm used to doing as I'm told," Cinderella sniffed. The fairy godmother told her to bring a pumpkin, 4 white mice, and a black rat. Cinderella hurried to the garden and picked a pumpkin. She found 4 mice that were in the kitchen, and she caught a rat sleeping in the barn. With the wave of the fairy's wand, the pumpkin turned into a gleaming golden coach. Cinderella gasped in astonishment. "It's beautiful," she said. "But who will drive it?" The fairy waved her wand again, and the 4 mice became 4 handsome white horses. She waved her wand a 3rd time, and the rat turned into a tall coachman. "How wonderful," Cinderella cried, "but I can't go to the ball in these rags." "And you won't go in rags," her fairy godmothers cried. She waved her wand, and Cinderella's rags turned into a beautiful ball gown. Glittering glass slippers appeared on her feet. Cinderella looked lovely. "Now, off you go," her fairy godmother said. "But remember, all this will vanish at midnight, so you make sure you home by then." Cinderella climbed into the coach, and it whisked her away to the palace. She never been happier. Well, everyone was enchanted by the lovely stranger, especially the prince, who danced with her all evening. Cinderella enjoyed herself so much she completely forgot the fairy godmother's warning. Suddenly, the palace clock began to strike midnight. Bong, bong, bong. Cinderella picked up her skirts and fled. The worried prince ran after her. Bong, bong, bong. She ran down the palace steps. She lost one of her glass slippers on the way, but she didn't dare stop. Bong, bong, bong. Cinderella jumped onto the coach and it drove off before the prince could stop her. Bong, bong, bong. On the final stroke of midnight, Cinderella found herself on the roadside beside a pumpkin. 4 white mice and a black rat scampered around her. She was dressed in rags and had only a single glass slipper left from her magical evening. Even if it was a dream, she said to herself, it was a perfect dream. Now, at the palace, the prince looked longingly at the glass slipper he had found on the steps that night. He could not forget the wonderful girl he had danced with all night long. I will find her, he said to himself, and I will marry her. So he took the glass slipper and set out to visit every house in the land. At last, he came to Cinderella's house. Her 2 stepsisters tried to squeeze their huge feet into the delicate slipper. But no matter what they did, they could not fit their fat feet into the slipper. Cinderella watched as she scrubbed the floor. May I try, please? She asked. You? Laughed the eldest. You didn't even go to the ball. Everyone may try, the prince said. Cinderella sat down. Her foot slipped easily into the glass slipper. The prince took Cinderella into his arms. You're the one, he said. Will you marry me, please? Cinderella's stepmother and stepsisters were furious. It can't be her. She's just a servant. She dresses in rags. But at that moment, the fairy godmother appeared and turned Cinderella's rags back into the fabulous ball gown. Cinderella took the other slipper from her pocket. Yes, Cinderella said. Yes, it was me. And yes, I will marry you. Much to the disgust of her stepmother and stepsisters, Cinderella married the prince the very next day and went to live in the palace. The couple lived long, happy lives together, and Cinderella's stepmother and her daughters had to do their own cleaning and never went to the ball at the palace ever again. The end. Thank you for joining us, and it's time for story time. Till next time. You did a great job with reading today. Remember to like, subscribe, and hit the bell to be notified of new books weekly.